Tributes continue to pour in for human rights lawyer and anti-apartheid activist George Bizos. He passed away yesterday at the age of 92. For more, we're joined by former President Thabo Mvuyelwa Mbeki to reflect on his life. Thabo Mvuyelwa, a very good afternoon to you, and thank you very much for joining us. Perhaps if you can go down memory lane and your earliest memory of Mr. Bizos.
Well, of course, you know, the death of the passing away of George Bizos, of course, is a very, very sad moment for all of us. But I'd like to say that, you know, there is a front of struggle that we don't talk about. That is the legal front, particularly during the years of apartheid. That legal confrontation between the liberation movement and the apartheid regime was a very important part of the struggle. And there's a few names which stand out as people who were the frontline fighters in terms of that front of struggle. I'm talking about people, lawyers, like Bram Fisher, like Ismails, like Sidney Kentridge, like George Bizos, like Arthur Chaskalson, like Joel Joffe, the particular group of lawyers who were very much part of the struggle and indeed continued beyond 1994 because we were committed fighters for the liberation of our country. And George Bizos was a member of that group, an outstanding member of that group, and continued in this fight, as I say, until he was quite old. So I think when we say that we really mourn the passing of George Bizos, that is well meant. That comes from the heart because of where he stood in the processes which led to the South Africa that we enjoy today.
And he's someone who was very big on justice and for apartheid victims as well. He wanted to see the prosecution of those who were not granted amnesty by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, but he passes away yesterday without even having seen justice or the prosecution of those who massacred people at Marikana. Your reflection on that?
No, but that's absolutely correct. That's very much... Indeed, you are quite correct. That's part of George Bizos. That's part of this particular group of lawyers that I'm talking about. They were after liberation, but they were also after justice. And so, indeed, it was not an accident that George, for instance, was one of the people who appeared at the Truth and Reconciliation Commission on behalf of the victims, on behalf of the victims, to speaking against the perpetrators of that violence who had killed people and all that. It was no accident that he was at Marikana. Indeed, no accident that he appeared in many cases to stand up for the justice, as you say. And indeed, you are quite right. Even he appeared now in this court case which related to the assassination of Ahmed Timol, and therefore the prosecution of this police officer, former police officer, was accused of that particular matter. So yes, indeed, you are quite correct. As I say, he was not only, these lawyers not only believed in liberation, which they did and fought for, but they did indeed, they stood very, very firmly for justice.
Has he ever reflected with you on the current state of democracy in South Africa and something which is very rampant at the moment, which is corruption that he bemoaned?
Yes, no, George was very, very concerned, I think very disturbed about where the country is going with regard to its politics, with regard to all of these things that are going wrong, like the matter of corruption, the manner in which the country is being governed, what has happened to the ANC, all of these things. I was very, very disturbed indeed about all of this because obviously in all of these years that he was involved in the struggle, not just as a lawyer, but indeed I'm saying as a committed liberator, he had a vision for this new South Africa, and what he was saying about what has been happening in the last few years, it disturbed him greatly.
In spite of his great achievements, he was not a very materialistic somebody. He remained humble and committed to the very end, some qualities that are quite rare to find in leadership and, one could arguably say, in society today.
Oh, yes, no, you are right. I mean, George was, in a sense, one would say, an ordinary human being in this sense that he was very accessible. He'd never carried on his shoulder any notion that I'm this outstanding lawyer, a legal eagle. You would never get a sense of that, because very, very simple, very ordinary person, but very brilliant lawyer, a very committed individual, but indeed, and very accessible. Very accessible. You could talk to him, you could engage him, and so George is a story that's never been told, as far as I can remember. This is now just relating to his engagement in the struggle. I think sometime in 1987, George came to see the ANC, came to see us in Lusaka in Zambia. He had been to see Nelson Mandela in jail. And in the course of that, had also interacted with Kobi Coetsee. You remember then at that time, Minister of Justice, who had also been interacting with Nelson Mandela. George came to Lusaka to deliver a message. And indeed, to deliver more than deliver a message, to have a discussion. And the message was that Kobi Coetsee had said that the regime was discussing the matter of the release of political prisoners. Mandela and everybody else was in jail, but they were very concerned about what the consequences of that release would be. That this might be a spark for a popular uprising, which would overthrow the government. And that they would want the release, but they wouldn't want that negative consequence, negative from their point of view. So George came to bring this message to say, what do we do about this? And we discussed it. And he was of the view, as the rest of us were, that, okay, let's challenge them, the regime, to see whether they were serious about this. And so what happened was, Mac Maharaj, and myself, it was agreed that we were ready then to come into the country to engage with our leaders like Nelson Mandela and the others, to engage with the regime, and also to engage with the masses of our people. To say that let this release happen, let's not use it in order to mount a big campaign to remove the regime, in order to secure the release, because that release of the political prisoners would enable us then to organize, to mount a very important offensive after they had been released. But I'm saying George came with this message not only as a messenger, but as a strategist to discuss this matter with us and say, well, how do we handle it? He had his own views about it, and we all agreed about it. He went back and conveyed the message, but of course the regime never did anything about it at the time. But I'm just saying about who George was, that he more than just a lawyer, but very much part of these liberation forces in our country.
Thabo Mvuyelwa, a final thought perhaps from you. Mr. Bizos was somebody who fought tirelessly for the marginalized in South Africa. When we look at the state of affairs in current South Africa, not much has changed for the majority of the people of this country. How do we take that passion forward?
Well, indeed, what has been said recently, as you know, I think virtually by the entirety of the political leadership in the country, that we must prepare for a post-COVID-19 South Africa, a post-COVID-19 South Africa. And that post-COVID-19 South Africa must be radically different from the pre-COVID-19 South Africa. I think that's a correct decision, that's a correct outlook, that's a correct approach. The challenge is then to translate that vision into a practical program, which has to do with what we do about the economy. What we do about the economy to make sure that, as everybody says, it becomes inclusive, that it doesn't marginalize, as it is doing currently, millions of people, deals with these issues of poverty, of unemployment, and marginalization, inequality, etc. That's one thing. And of course, there are the other considerations which have got to do with how you organize society. And critical to all of these things, of course, is this struggle against corruption. So I'm saying that happily everybody says, it seems, in the political leadership, everybody seems to be agreed on this perspective, on this vision. Let's have a post-COVID-19 new South Africa, which will address all of the challenges that we have not been able to solve over the last 25, 30 years. Let's aim for that. And I'm saying, and I think therefore our leadership, whether it's ANC or anybody else, in our government, everybody has got a particular challenge to say what is it that we do practically to produce that radically new post-COVID-19 South Africa. I think that's a major challenge.
For your time.
And an opportunity.
Thank you very much for your time and your reflections with us this afternoon. Former President Thabo Mvuyelwa Mbeki.